Hello everyone. My name is Joseph Klingelhutz. I work for the Sustainable Iowa Land Trust, otherwise known as Silt. Um, I live in Johnson County, Iowa, in Iowa City. I grew up in Solon, Iowa, went to school at Iowa State and graduated in 2016. And I currently farm on the side. Me and a couple other people cooperatively manage a small vegetable farm and sell a small vegetable CSA, and I also have a small sideline beekeeping operation. So that's what I do on the side as a farmer, but I also work full-time as the farm specialist for the Sustainable Iowa Land Trust. And I've been doing this for about 2.5 years now. I have an office in West Branch, just east of Iowa City, but I work all across the state, and we'll talk more about that. The Sustainable Iowa, well, first of all, thank you so much, PFI. This is my 4th time being to this conference, and thank you guys for having us again, and I hope to see you guys all next year. The Sustainable Iowa Land Trust, we're a nonprofit organization that's been around for about 6 years now. Silt was started by a group of people that got together to try and tackle some problems that we're facing here in Iowa. And as many of you guys know, because you guys are practical farmers and you know a lot of the topics that we're already talking about, there's a lot of things that we have to tackle in Iowa in terms of a farm crisis, I believe. Right now, Iowa actually, we say that we feed the world, but we actually import 90% of the food that we eat. And this is relatable to a state such as Hawaii in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So it's pretty safe to say that we are a food desert here in this state. And the amount of food that we actually, or the amount of crops that we actually grow in this state don't actually get used here in Iowa. And I won't dive into this too much, but just to know that this is one of the issues that Silt is ongoingly trying to tackle. And also land access is another big issue. Right now, land prices have actually quadrupled in the last 30 years in Iowa, and it's easy to find land prices in Iowa for more than $10,000 an acre. And if you're a beginning farmer, getting into farming and finding land to farm is one of the biggest barriers for beginning farmers, and we're going to talk more about that later. But it's Silt's mission to protect land in Iowa to grow healthy food. And how we do this is, well, we are a land trust, and many of you probably know what land trusts are. There are hundreds of land trusts all across the country. There are several in Iowa, but how land trusts work are they protect land in perpetuity for conservation purposes. So there are a lot of natural land trusts all across the country that will protect a piece of property, have property donated to them, and will protect the property for conservation purposes. And what the land trusts do with these properties, it's up to the land trust itself. It may be kind of up to the landowner too, but they'll protect the property for specific purposes. And then they'll either, they'll restore prairies, they'll restore woodland, but Silt specializes in protecting farmland for sustainable food production. That is how we differ from other land trusts in the country. And like I said, we specialize in protecting land for sustainable food farming. And when I mean sustainable food farming, as many as you know, Iowa has the potential to grow a lot of different types of foods here. We have the soil and we have the climate to do so. And I'm talking about growing table foods such as tomatoes, fruits, nuts, mushrooms, honey. Sorry, I think I have something in the chat here, but oh, I just want to say, if you guys have any questions, please put them into the chat. We're going to have I should have said this at the beginning, I'm sorry, but we're going to have a Q&A at the end. Put your questions into the chat, and we're also going to be moderating questions throughout, and you may have your question answered, but please feel free to ask that there. Back again, we're talking about food farming. We're talking about things that people actually eat. And like I said, we import 90% of the food that we eat here in the state. So we're literally trying to unearth the discussion about protecting land in Iowa for specifically food farming purposes. And I know many people who grow food in Iowa. You guys grow food in Iowa. You know many of people who grow all these types of foods. We have to start talking about actually protecting the land for growing food, because most of the land in Iowa is owned by people over the age of 65 years old. So over the next 20, 30 years, there's going to be massive billions of dollars of land being turned over. And we need to find landowners who are willing to protect their land for conservation purposes. So moving on then, a lot of my job as the farm specialist is to reach out to landowners and to find landowners who believe that they are only stewards of their land for a time being while they are alive. And this is true for everyone. Everyone dies. Everyone who owns land will not be able to keep their land forever. So we need to have this discussion, which is extremely hard discussions to have if you've ever been part of it, but to know that you can pass the legacy of your land on to the next generation is huge. And Silt is facilitating these kind of protections and working with landowners to give them another option instead of knowing that their farm might be sold off on auction after they die, or their neighbor might buy up their farm and they have no kids or no family friends to pass the land on to. Landowners can literally donate their land to a land trust such as Silt, and then Silt can then provide affordable long-term access to beginning farmers on long-term leases, which are inheritable. So some of the ways that we do this, landowners can protect their land using a reserved life estate. This is a way that a landowner, if they're still living on their land, using their land, they can donate their deed to Silt, and Silt kind of acts as a surrogate in a way that protects their land. And when the landowner passes on or is not the proprietary owner anymore, Silt will then be the landowner and then can provide those long-term leases. We also use a thing called conservation easements. And these are powerful tools used by all land trusts to protect property in perpetuity. What Silt uses is called an agricultural conservation easement, which is a legal binding document which necessitates the use of the land as a sustainable food farm. And I'm not going to dive into what a conservation easement does or how it works, but just know that these are very powerful tools. They're attached to the deed of the land, recorded with the county, and necessitate the use of the land as a food farm, and they live on in perpetuity. So reserve life estates are big ones. We're going to be talking with a panelist here who donated their land later, and we'll dive a little bit more into that. And conservation easements, which a lot of land trusts use all across the country. So then, once we have land protected, we start talking with food farmers. We're talking with people who need access to land. Like I said, land access is one of the biggest barriers to getting into farming. Most people gain access to land either through family inheritance and going into a lot of debt if they want to buy land, or getting onto leases if they can find a good lease with a good landowner. But Silt wants to provide a way for food farmers to not have to worry about going into debt, or not worry about having family who has land just so they can be able to farm. We want to provide a way that farmers can get started, build capital, build their business, and not have to worry about the security of their land. So on one side, we're working with landowners. On the other side, we're working with food farmers, and Silt is in the middle making that all happen. So I am not going to be talking this whole time. We actually have some panelists here that are part of Silt. We have a board member and landowner, Lyle Luzum, who's going to be talking about his donation, and as well as some food farmers after this. But let me just wrap up here. So Silt currently has farms all across the state. We have 13 farms that we permanently protected, which total over 1,100 acres, as you can see here on this map. We're spread out across the state, and we're slowly growing. We're only 6 years old, but we have a couple more farms that are coming under our protection in the next couple of years. These farms here have either been donated to us, so they're properties that we either own, or they are properties that we have conservation easements on. And that again is those owners still own the land, but Silt owns the easement and we enforce the easement. So there are ways for landowners to still own their land and then Silt protect their land in perpetuity. That's just something I just want to keep hammering into you guys. A lot of people think that you have to give up your land to protect it. No, there are ways that you can protect your land and still retain ownership for it. So moving on, before we get into our panelist discussion, I'd like to let you guys know that we have a wonderful website, silt.org. If you guys want to go there, there's just a lot of great information for landowners, farmers, or if you just want to learn more about Silt, you can also donate to us. And we also have a brand new book called An Iowa Landowner's Guide to Sustainable Food Crops. This is a book that my executive director, Susan Aram, and I worked on through a SARE grant, Sustainable Ag and Research Education grant, to provide this book for free to anyone. You can download a PDF at our website here. I know you guys can't click on that. Write down that address and you can go download a PDF, or you can request a free hard copy by emailing me. So I just want to put a plug into that because that's a brand new book that we got and we're very excited about it. So you guys are not going to be bored to death by hearing me talk this whole time because we have some wonderful panelists here. We're going to start off with Lyle Luzum, who I said is a landowner. He is also on the board of Silt. Lyle and Sue is not here today, donated their farm up in Decorah, Iowa, their 170-acre family farm to the Sustainable Iowa Land Trust. And before I go any further, I'm going to have Lyle just take over here and start talking. I'm going to run through some slides here. So Lyle, do you want to take it away and introduce yourself for a couple minutes?
Okay, will do. By the way, Joe, your presentation, you're also showing the next slide, so it's not in full presentation mode.
Oh no, I don't know how to not do that.
Okay, well, and anyway, that doesn't matter, but
it'll take the excitement away, but it works. All right.
Okay, yeah, so our farm is a family farm that's has been in our family since 1873. My great-grandparents were immigrants to this country, and this is the farm that it eventually purchased, and it's been in our family since. I was the fourth generation on the farm. Our daughter was the fifth who grew up on the farm. It's between Kelmer and Decorah. It's the northeast corner. We have one daughter, and so that made it a simpler decision in many ways as we talk about some of this stuff. I think it'll be apparent that the family needs to be on board in this whole process. So I started farming after teaching in Illinois for 7 or 8 years. Came back and we purchased the farm in 1979. And as those of you who were part of that experience know, that is the beginning of the farm crisis. So I got to experience the full advantage of being part of the farm crisis generation. In 1989, I had the opportunity to take a full-time position as a IT at a Northeast Iowa Community College. And the result was that I had to decide whether I was going to farm primarily or do this full-time job. And I decided to do the full-time job and put a lot of the acres into the Conservation Reserve Program. I continued to raise sheep on the side because that's kind of what I did since I was a kid. And so that happened in 1989. And so from then until 2010, I was the IT director at Northeast Iowa Community College, and I then retired from that position. And at that point, I kind of picked up back a little more farming. When I first put this out into the CRP, the organic, USDA organic was only in its infancy or hadn't quite been established. So what I decided to do was to see what this is all about. So I certified organic, and I farmed the acres that were not in the CRP in an organic fashion, and raised sheep and sold lamb into the local food market, which had become established up here in Northeast Iowa through our food and fitness initiative with the Kellogg's Foundation. And this was the first time in my life that there had actually been a market for lamb in restaurants and for individuals. So what I found was that, in fact, it was feasible to grow food for people in a way that was really interesting for me, and I think was satisfying for those who were able to purchase from us. This made me think that there was a future for our farm, perhaps other than being bought out by the next biggest neighbor and turned into the corn and soybean farm, and with a CAFO on it. And part of the reason we had this problem of what to do with it was that our farm was one of the oldest conservation farms in the county. My father had put a couple miles of terraces on, built them with a 2-bottom plow, and those terraces are still existing, and they're some of the oldest terraces in the county. And I didn't want to see that conservation legacy destroyed. In 2015, I think it was April 2015, our local food co-op annual meeting, Susan Aram, who was the founder of Silt and is now the executive director of Silt, spoke, and she talked about this new land trust that was forming. And the purpose was to protect land to grow sustainable food, which is the kind of food, of course, that our food co-op was interested in selling and did sell. And I said, maybe there's an option here that I didn't know about, because in fact it didn't exist before, and that's why I didn't know about it. So I came up to Susan and I said, I think I have a farm for you. And that began our discussion. And 2 years later, we figured out how to do this all, and we donated the farm outright it was actually a bargain sale, because we needed to have someplace to live. So we needed to be able to purchase a house, which we did in Decorah. And the farm was donated to Silt and is now one of the Silt farms that's owned by Silt. It was not a reserve life estate. We chose not to continue living on it because we had this house available. And it's not an easement, and so we do not own the land with those restrictions on it. Silt, in fact, is the owner of the land, and Silt is responsible for finding the farmer, and they developed a process to do so. So that's kind of the summary. I'm currently retired, living in Decorah, and serving on the board of Silt and doing other things, and happy to see that there is somebody on the farm and who they're growing food as I hoped it would be. So that's my quick summary.
Thank you so much, Lyle. Lyle is a great ally of Silt, and has served on our committees and whatnot, and has helped develop Silt policy. So we're so happy to have him on board, and to also have him donate his land to Silt. We are going to be talking more to Lyle in a little bit, but I first want to introduce Jupiter Ridge Farm. Will and Adrian are here. They are some young farmers. I don't know if they would call themselves young anymore, but they still look great. Will and Adrian farm up in Clayton County, up near a little town called Garber on Jupiter Ridge Farm, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and take it away, you guys.
All right, I'm Adrian White, and this is my husband, Will Lorentzen. We're co-owners and operators of Jupiter Ridge Farm. We'll do a quick little intro here. I've been farming for almost 10 years. My background is college-based, internship-based, getting into food and agriculture. I started out farming in college, and gardening and farming and all that stuff. and was traveling around the country as a farmer and ended up in Iowa to get our farming business finally up and running after years of experience. And yeah, that's about it for me.
Yeah, Adrian and I met about 10 years ago when we were traveling with the Renaissance Fair, and we both shared a love of farming. At that time, we were interning, and I had stumbled into it by accident a few years earlier and found out I loved it and continued to travel to support my habit of farming for no money. Well, we learned this, but we heard about Silt when we were ready to move on and take our next step through the PFI listserv and also through our old boss, Derek Roller of Ecollective Farms, closer to Iowa City. Currently, our operation is Jupiter Ridge Farm, or Jupiter Ridge LLC. We produce over 70 varieties of vegetables and then annuals. We have a small orchard as well as a 70 by 16 nursery greenhouse. We produce specialty crops like varieties of mushrooms as well as fresh herbs. And yeah, I think we are going to keep our intro a little short. It looks like we're kind of getting there on time. So just wanted to give you the quick intro there. There's some beautiful pictures. You can kind of see what we do. We lean really heavily on sustainable practices, which we will get into a little earlier, because that is one of the things that a land trust allows you to do, is invest in longevity of your farm.
Yeah, we can't go through an intro without mentioning Steve Beaumont as well, who is the previous owner of the land we're farming right now. And without him making that generous donation as a landowner to this trust, we wouldn't be here. And we have a great relationship with him, and we have immense gratitude for his role as a landowner working with the Silt Land Trust.
Yeah, Steve always wanted to see us succeed, and we still visit him in the nursing home. And I can tell you personally that talking to him, this is a huge relief for him to see somebody working the land and living in and appreciating the house that he built. And yeah, it's a wonderful experience getting to know Steve. And yeah, it would be a shame to not mention him here.
Yeah, absolutely. Steve Beaumont is a wonderful man, very conservation minded, and yeah, Steve is still alive, but this is a great example. Thank you guys for bringing him up. Steve donated his land, but still retained ownership of the land for a while until he decided to move into a nursing home, and then the land went into full ownership with Silt. And now Adrian and Will are on a 20-year lease with us, which we are going to talk about again. But I'm going to stop sharing here, and we are going to move into our panelist discussion. Thank you for all those wonderful pictures that you guys sent of your farm. They're so beautiful. So let me pull up. So right now we have Lyle and Will and Adrian here. I'm going to be moderating some questions. Please, everyone, feel free to continue to put questions into the chat. My executive director, Susan Aram, is in the chat and will be answering questions that way, but we will also be fielding questions at the end for about 10 minutes in a Q&A. But to start off, so the first question is for Lyle. Lyle, did you have any other options or ideas what to do with your land instead of working with Silt?
Well, until Silt came along, it was always a puzzle. And part of the puzzle was we knew we wanted to not have all this stuff that had happened in conservation-wise being lost. And we were seeing that as the pattern from the farm crisis of the 80s. That's really the story of the 80s, is that farms disappeared to bigger farms, and the communities that those farmers made happen withered. And we knew there was a certain inevitability to some of that, but we didn't really want to be a part of that if we could avoid it. And the only choices that seemed to be around were to pass it on to your heir. We had a daughter, and that was our assumption, is that The easy way is to just retain it until you die, and then it moves on, and you don't have to think about it. Or you could sell it, you can cash out and decide that you're the generation that gets to reap the windfall, and it wasn't clear to us why we were so special that we should be the ones who would get the windfall after these generations, just because we were willing to cash out and sell out our legacy. The other, of course, is we could rent it, and you'd have to continue finding renters, and you'd have to be managing the rental situation, which really wasn't something that we cared to do either. So we didn't really know how to or want to be involved in finding a farmer who would take over and care for the land as we wanted it to be cared for, either in renting or in selling. So the options weren't they weren't available. Anything that was not a little bit something that we could feel squeamish about. So when this option came along, it became apparent that this was something different, and that it would solve a lot of the concerns that we had about the use of the land, and it took off us the burden of trying to find somebody to do those things. So with the assumption that this would actually go to our daughter, then it became a question: is she going to want to do this? Well, we had not assumed that we were going to be selling the land in order to retire, so we had used other means to build the retirement fund. We both worked and things like that, so that was not something that we anticipated requiring to do in order to just live. Our daughter and her husband, they have been building a life, and they're in their 40s, and they too had not decided that they were going to be farming because, number one, that wasn't what they chose to do. And then the question was, do they want to do that as a change of life? Well, they had also started building for their retirement in their own work world. And again, for the farm, they didn't need the farm in order to retire later either. So what we had is two generations of people who had were fortunate to be able to not require the sale of the land in order to continue living. And we had the option to do something different, which was to make our farm be part of a legacy of availability for those who did not have the fortunate circumstances of being born into land. And it just didn't seem right that being born into land is the only way to get it.
Land transfer and family discussions of land are some of the hardest discussions you can have with family, and as I'm sure a lot of the attendees here know, when they have family land, it's a difficult discussion, and it can take years and years to go through. So,
and it tears families apart in ways that almost nothing else does.
Yes,
It's
it
a
can.
very, very difficult thing, and I feel sorry for those who have not been able to resolve it. I guess in a sense we were lucky because we had only one person to have that discussion with. It gets much more difficult when you have multiple people, some of whom have concern for the land, some of whom have concern for money, and those two don't mix very well.
Yep, absolutely. Well, thank you, Lyle. This next question is for Jupiter Ridge. When you guys were looking for a property to start a farm, what were some of the characteristics and other aspects that you were looking for in land as beginning farmers?
I'll take this one. So when we were ready to strike out on our own, we had always known that we wanted to be in this general facility. For years, we had actually been taking our days off to go fishing about 10 miles from where the farm is now. So this general geographic location was great because for mushrooms, you have a lot of really great hardwoods. You have a lot of logging companies up here, more so than you do in a lot of other parts of Iowa. With access to those hardwoods. We wanted a property that had some north slope to it, so we would have more temperate conditions for the mushrooms, more shade. We did also want something with an amount of tillable land that we would be able to have market our offerings. We also wanted to be closest to our We wanted to be close within driving distance of markets that we had already started to scope and develop in the process of beginning our business, with those being in Cedar Rapids and Dubuque. So this spot right here, when we first stepped on the land with Steve, we knew it was the right spot. Just the amount of acreage. The wind's a little intense, but you know, can't complain about the weather, or you can. Farmers tend to quite a bit, it seems. So yeah, when we were looking for land, this pretty much checked off every part of our requirements.
The property that you guys have it's only about 22 acres or so. It's not a very big property, but it's enough for what you guys need, and you do only about 2 acres of vegetables, and the mushrooms just take up a very small amount of that land in the woodland. So it's very minimal, and the rest of it is in forest and CRP. So like I said, oh, go on.
The property is about split even between restored prairie, which is actually not in CRP. It was actually just done as a private effort of Steve Beaumont, because he was that kind of guy. Did it not for the money, but that's perfect for us in that it provides a lot of good predator and pollinator insect population habitat, or habitat rather. And yeah, the land isn't very big. We have about 2 acres in vegetables, and if you count the nursery and the perennial planting that we did in the orchard, it probably is about another acre in there with the mushrooms. So,
and to piggyback a little bit, I think the draw of working with someone who's so conservation minded and all about small farming and gardening and food production, and then eventually that opportunity of working with Silt was a huge draw too, of having this long-term situation here, plus all the nitty-gritty benefits.
Mm-hmm. So the next question, Lyle, can you speak to some of the challenges as a former farmer that makes the conversation of farmland protection so important right now?
Well, as you noted in your introduction, we're getting old. And farmers have to face the fact that the predominance of farmers started when things were not in this difficult price situation in terms of the land. And the ownership of the land is in the hands of people who are going to have to find something to do with it. And most of them are going to sell it, and that land is mostly going to go to bigger landowners or to investors or something like that who want to simply make more money on it. And as people get further, and children too, as the children have less to do with the land, their interest in the land itself starts diminishing. So the further away you get from actually having responsibility to care for the land, the more likely you are to have dollars be the draw for you. So not all people are in a position to not sell their land, and that's understandable. People have different situations, and if you have to sell it in order to survive, that's what you have to do. If you have the option to not do something like that, a situation like Silt gives you that option to be able to pass it on to somebody else. So all farmers have to face the fact that we're going to not be here. The question is, how do you want to have your land be treated when you are gone? And Silt is an option that allows you to pass on a legacy if you care about that as part of your legacy. And not everybody does, and that's why we're all different people.
Absolutely. I get a lot of questions from landowners that years in conversation about what's right, and they just get so frustrated about what to do with their land. And the land trust model is a pretty novel model for land protection to some, and the discussion about it and understanding how it works takes a while, and a lot of people are now coming on board. with realizing that land trusts are able to protect farms and are able to protect properties in perpetuity. We have about 20 minutes left. Okay. So this is for Jupiter Ridge. Will and Adrian, how does your long-term lease help you determine whether or not you will incorporate long-term farming practices such as planting perennials or improving soil health or building your structures? How do you the security that you have in your land?
Well, it affects it in a way that I would think would be in some ways somewhat obvious to anyone that has ever rented farmland. When you rent farmland on a short-term lease, it's really hard to plant perennial crops like rhubarb or asparagus that you won't see return on in that year that you're renting. Even in a 3-year lease, you really start to see those profits as the plants mature and as you've had them in the ground longer, especially with asparagus, fruit trees, even with the mushrooms to an extent. If we didn't already have a stack of already fruiting logs, a stock of about 600 of them, we wouldn't have been able to make money on them that first year. We also have invested heavily in our large nursery house, which is something you would not do on rented land. You might get as far as the Caterpillar tunnel or something, you know, you can pack up and run in the middle of the night if you gotta. But we also invested a lot of money in expanding and fixing our pack sheds. Steve was more than generous enough to have started construction on it, but it got to a point where there were some structural issues and we had to redo and build things. And again, just something you wouldn't do on rented land.
Yeah, and I mean, most situations like with, you know, working with someone not on a land trust where they're just renting some acreage to you, you don't know the long term. You don't know if someone might change their mind and say, oh, I don't think I want a farmer on this land anymore. I want to use it for something different. And in that case, you're always on your toes being, you know, I don't know if I want to plant rhubarb here or apple trees that will, you know, come to fruition in 7 years. And then that investment is a waste of money. But, you know, with a land trust like Silt, that at the get-go, it's like you can make that investment and start making money off of those perennial crops much sooner, and it's much more secure. And I mean, compared, like mixed with and compared to annual crop farming, that's a pretty big deal for beginning farmers, is to have some perennial crops on the side to bring in income. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And having those long-term leases as a beginning farmer and having that security, I mean, it just, the creativity then flows when you know you have the security in the land to do all these long-term projects. A lot of farmers on those 1 to 2 year leases don't have that security and don't know if they're going to be there on their land next year and may not care about building soil health or planting perennials. So now you guys have the security to do that on this land.
Absolutely.
All right. Lyle, what would you say to other landowners like yourself looking for options to protect their land? And this will be the last question I ask, Lyle, for you.
Well, I think it depends on how they see their land. If they feel that their land is a commodity that is best treated as a moneymaker, they're not going to be interested in Silt. If they're concerned about somebody being able to use their farm in order to do something beyond just make money, then Silt becomes an option. Will and Adrian talked about the long-term investments that a long-term lease gives them the opportunity to do. And it's the same thing with conservation, land conservation. If you're going to put in terraces or contour strip cropping or things like that, if you're going to try and treat the land in a way that isn't just the shortest term return, you need to put investments in that land. And renters aren't going to do that. The landowner is the only one who can provide that opportunity. And I think one of the questions that they have to ask themselves is, even if you do want to have something like food farmers farm your land, are you going to be the one who wants to go out and find them? You know, that is one of our questions. How do we go out and find somebody like, for instance, Will and Adrian, uh, or the Boons who are on our farm? We don't have the ability and the networks to go out and seek farmers to do the vetting that's necessary to find exactly the right combination of farmer who wants to live on that farm in that place, use it with the restrictions that Silt has on it. That's a very difficult thing to do, and people underestimate the difficulty of finding a good renter and finding a good partner to sell it to. And most of them just give up and say, well, I'll just turn it over to a land management company and take the check and kind of turn my back and say, okay, here's the money coming in, and I give up. And I don't think that's what a lot of them want to do, but if that's what you need to do or want to do, that's, you know, not the approach that Silt would be your target for.
It is a lot easier to just say it's too hard to do, and we'll just let the next person do whatever they want with the land.
One thing I do want to say is that making this decision to do this, there's never been a second thought since we did it. It took us 2 years to get to the point from hearing about it to donating it. But once we did that, the relief that we felt was enormous. And that our daughter felt that she did not have that same burden. Even though she didn't get to inherit it, she did not have that burden of trying to figure out what to do with that farm. And we all feel better because of that. And there's somebody appreciating the farm right now. And there wouldn't have been otherwise.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much, Lyle. One more question, and then we'll go into the panel or the attendees' questions. This is for Jupiter Ridge, kind of segueing off the last one. Will and Adrian, what would you say to other young farmers who are skeptical to working with a land trust?
I would say that if you're serious, it's completely worth it. And it's one of the few viable paths towards land ownership or land stewardship for a lot of people in our generation. Land prices are skyrocketing. I don't see that slowing down. They're not making any more of it. So, you know, you have to work with what you got. And Silt has been a great organization. And between the team of Silt, Steve, who had our success in mind, and the Young Farmer Committee, which we're a part of, Silt has many layers that are there to protect you as a farmer. They want to see you succeed. It's good for them. It's good for you. And yeah, you don't have to be skeptical, is what I would say. I mean, you know, you could spend your whole life renting an apartment in Iowa City, and what would you have to show for it? Or you could potentially rent land from Silt and, you know, have a farm, have a future, and have roots in the community. And that's huge.
I would also say that no matter how you slice it, working with Silt is a better provides you a better security net than just renting from the average person, you know, unless like you have this really close, like long-term relationship with a landowner. But generally speaking, your security net is better. It's there. Even the challenges that might come with working with a land trust, the uncertainties, I think they're far more manageable and more secure and more navigable than working with, you know, a random person who just has land that they want to rent and may change the objective or the desire of what they want that land to look like or who's on it. So I would say go for it, for sure.
Well, we have to thank you guys because you guys were some of the first people that we worked with. I wasn't around when you guys came on board, so Silt was experimenting a lot, and the lease that you guys are on now was still being made and stuff. So Will and Adrian, they're like quote unquote little guinea pigs for Silt in the beginning, but we are so happy to have them with us, and they're doing a wonderful job. And yeah, if you guys have questions, I'm sure Will and Adrian would be happy to answer them. They have their email. They could put it in here in the chat too. So if any beginning farmers have questions, and same with Lyle, if anyone has any questions, I'm sure he would be happy to answer, and he can put his email into the chat as well. But we are running on the last 10 minutes of time. We got started a little late here, but I see a lot of questions coming in through the chat, and I'm going to try and figure out where they start. So questions for panel to answer at the end. Do landowners donating the easements also provide donations to help Silt monitor the easements? And this is yes, we do not only ask landowners when they are donating a conservation easement to lower the value of their land with this conservation easement, because what this conservation easement does, it restricts development. So it lowers the value of the land. You might be thinking, oh, that would be crazy to lower the value of one of your biggest assets. But when you lower that value of your land, it makes it more affordable for the next farmer because of that easement attached to the deed. We then also ask the landowner if they are able to provide a monitoring fund that Silt invests to then send someone like me or someone else, whoever is in my position, to monitor the land once per year. Every land trust in the country has to go visit their land once a year and monitor it and enforce those easements. And that's that is just part of our protection strategy, to make sure someone's not building condos on the back 40 or tilling on E and F slopes and causing a bunch of soil erosion. Does Silt subdivide the farms in order to provide more manageable size and serve more people? We usually like to keep our farms as a whole and intact, but there is room for more than one farmer on the land. But basically, we want to keep the farm intact and not subdivide the farm itself. Let's see, you mentioned leasing the land that Silt becomes the owner of once it is protected. Is there a pathway to ownership for folks pursuing that route? Leasing the land. So like I said, we have landowners who donate their land, donate the deed of their land to us, but then still retain ownership of the land. And then when that landowner passes on or decides to not be the proprietary owner, like in Will and Adrian's case, Steve Beaumont was the landowner and he was still using the land and helping Will and Adrian get established, but then he decided to move into a nursing home, and Silt then became the full owner of the land. And then we then provide a 20-year lease to Will and Adrian. Hopefully that answers your question.
Well, I think you need to add there that Will and Adrian have the ability to purchase the home and the buildings.
Yes.
And that's an important piece of that. That's where the equity building comes in.
Yep.
Yeah, there certainly is equity building. While we may never be able to own the land, the lease is inheritable should we have children. And we also do own the home, which and this gets a little bit into the weeds, but since it's such a captive market, if we were to leave, Silt would actually then purchase the home back off of us, or whatever equity we have put into it, to then find another farmer to put into it.
Yep. So you guys are building equity on the property. You don't own the land. You have a 20-year lease. This is how we're working. Is Silt is owning the land and allowing farmers to build equity through infrastructure on their property that they can then pass on to the next farmer to sell to the next farmer, but Silt will retain ownership of the land. How do the farms working with Silt sell the food they produce to the community? You guys have a CSA, you do farmers market, you sell to restaurants. We're very open. We want the farms to be working farms, and we want the farms to be growing nature-friendly food. And so there's a wide range of what farmers can do, but our main priority is to find beginning farmers wanting to sell food. Do you guys have anything you want to add?
Yeah, Silt has never tried to interfere or have a say in how or what we sell. We're extremely independent on that, and that's one of the nicer things about working with them is it's our business that we're running. It is a private enterprise. So every way that we want to sell, which aside from the farm stands, which I just don't believe that we have the population out here to support that as a viable means of sales, we do just about everything on that list.
Yeah, if you become a silt farmer and get on silt land, you run the whole business, you find your markets. Silt doesn't step in and do that for you. You're your own independent entity.
Absolutely. We want farmers to succeed. We don't want to be just another barrier or a bureaucratic nightmare for the farmers. We want them to succeed and want them to develop their business and take the time to do so as well. Which has been more challenging for Silt? Finding interested landowners or finding interested, inspiring farmers? It's both. It's a challenge for both. A lot of my job, as I mentioned, is talking to landowners all across the state. I do have to say there are a ton of landowners who believe already that they are only stewards of their land and believe in conservation and want their land to be protected. But then it goes back to the conversation that we were having earlier. It can be such a hassle. There could be one person in the family who's still living on the land, but they have 3 or 4 brothers or sisters living somewhere else in the country who don't care about the land and just want to make money off of it. And then there's this landowner still caring for the land. And so it can be really difficult. And it's also, you know, your land is one of your biggest assets as you know, you get to the end of your life, and that decision to donate it, I mean, it's a conversation you need to have with your lawyers, your CPA, your family. And yeah, but we're here to have that conversation. In terms of aspiring farmers, that's also, it's difficult too, but we're so grateful for organizations like PFI, Moses, Savannah Institute, other organizations that are working with beginning farmers already that have a network that Silt can then tap into when we want to do the job of protecting the land. There are already organizations out there doing a great job talking to beginning farmers. We want to tap those resources. We have a Silt Farm Seeker survey on our website that beginning farmers can go to and fill out and tell us what kind of land they're looking for. And I mean, it comes down to when we have the land available, that's when it is available. We only have 13 properties right now, but we're slowly growing. But sign up to be a member with Silt, and you will get newsletters and information about newly donated properties if you're a beginning farmer looking for land. We just have a couple minutes here. Will and Adrian, we're fortunate to have a structure already on the property. If no structure exists, are there complications with building mortgage on land with easements for beginning farmers? So usually in a conservation easement, when you're working with a conservation land trust, the restrictions on buildings, there are restrictions on buildings usually. With our conservation easements, we actually promote the idea of having agricultural buildings being built on the land because we want the farmers to live on the land. We want the farmers to build infrastructure and to succeed there. Within the easement though, and I'm not going to dive too much into this, but we necessitate an area of the land that we like to call the minimal protection area or the farmstead area, where a farmer can build in a little envelope of an area of the property where they can build barns and houses and other infrastructure. So we promote that. We know that farmers need a place to live and a barn and all the other things that go along with farming. Sally, am I done here? I see your face popped up and now.
Unfortunately, I'm the bad cop here, so I have to cut us off. We have.
Can I just say real quick, we have an exhibitor booth that anyone can come. Yep, and please ask us questions at our exhibitor booth.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for joining us, everybody. And thank you to Joe, Lyle, Adrian, and Will as well. This has been very useful.